Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Loading Complete, a video game podcast brought to you by Games Under Pressure and ESPN Milwaukee. My name is Brian Munt. I'm going to be your host for this show and every show from here on out. You're stuck with me. Boy, we got a lot to talk about this week. We're going to dive pretty deep into two different topics, and I think one of them is not super controversial, although I'm going to make a very controversial claim. The other, I think, is much more inherently controversial, and I'm going to take a position that might surprise you a little bit. It probably goes against how you feel. I'm just warning you. So keep that in mind. You're going to want to listen. Before we do all of that, however, I want to get back to the format of the show that we started with, because the last few weeks we've really deviated from that, and I want to get back. I want to get back to our roots and our origins and start off each show by talking about the games of the week. And we are in fall right now, which means we have a glut of games to talk about. I'll be honest with you, the big blockbusters of fall, none of them have really grabbed me so far. They haven't. And granted, we have yet to see a lot of the major games. Call of Duty isn't here yet, right? Everybody's sort of waiting on Call of Duty. It's not here yet. But there are a lot of other games that we can talk about. When I say that the games have been not disappointing, that's way too strong of a word, but average. I think the game has been average. Nothing has grabbed me, like I said. Nothing AAA, however. Nothing blockbuster caliber has grabbed me. However, boy, oh boy, I've been playing a game that I love. I love it. It's called Cuphead. Cuphead, if you haven't seen it, you probably have. It's a side-scroller / boss rush game that is done in the style of a 1930s cartoon. Let me say this. It is the most cohesive and consistent game art style I have ever seen. As a matter of fact, I will go farther than that, and I will say it is my favorite visual art style of any game I've ever played. The game crackles. There's film grain in it, like it was scanned hastily into a digital format. It looks like there's chromatic aberration, so the edges, there's a little bit of color bleed to them. The sound in this game is compressed, so it sounds old. The whole package comes together into this amazing, frustrating game. The game is out right now on the Xbox One. It's also out on Windows 10 Store and on Steam. If you buy it on the Windows 10 Store, it is a Play Anywhere title, which is one of my favorite initiatives that Microsoft has rolled out in the last many number of years. Basically, that allows you to buy it on the Windows 10 Store, download it not only on Windows 10 on your PC, but you can download it on your Xbox One, and you can play that game seamlessly between the two. So for me, that makes a lot of sense because I have my Xbox One S in my bedroom. I don't use it a whole ton. I typically game a lot more on my PC than I do on a console, but I'm able to play it in my bedroom, and then I'm able to go into my office whenever I don't want to lay in bed anymore, or when I actually want to record something meaningful. So that's been great. But Cuphead is insanely frustrating, and I don't mean frustrating in a negative connotation, because when you say it's frustrating, that implies, it sort of inherently implies that there's something wrong with the game that causes that frustration. So maybe a better word would be challenging, hyper challenging, but it is. The general idea behind Cuphead is you have this sort of overworld, and there are these different paths that you can take. And there are different bosses at each one of these locations. There are 3 worlds in total, and there's a handful of bosses at each one. These bosses are typically multi-stage bosses, multi-phase bosses. So the boss will change its attack or its form or its environment or all 3 multiple times throughout the course of that boss battle. Just like a Mega Man on the NES or any other game, like a Dark Souls, I think would be another apt comparison. It is a lot of memorization. It is a lot of attack memorization. So you're not going to beat any of these bosses the first time you go through them. It's not going to happen. As a matter of fact, you might have to go through them 15, 20, 30, 50 times to remember how to beat them, because their attacks are very, very predictable. So it's just about memorizing when their attacks are going to come, what the tells for those attacks are going to be. Does the boss wink at you before, he throws a projectile, or is there a slight shudder before he's going to kick you? Whatever the case is, you have to memorize that. Memorizing that is one thing, but actually pulling it off is another, because a lot of these bosses are just not only difficult to memorize, but also difficult to actually beat. A lot of the time you have a very narrow window through which to jump, or your timing is incredibly important, or trying to position the boss at a certain point on the screen so that 3-4 attacks later you don't get caught in the corner of the screen. That is all taken into account. So it is this very cerebral experience. It is not just this Twitch-based sort of thing where, okay, I can turn my brain off, put my hands on autopilot, and I'm going to be able to beat this. It's very, very difficult. Not only that, but the boss's attacks actually change. They're randomized. So the timing on one attack might be a little bit different after you die than it was your previous session, which is also phenomenal. I've heard some people complaining about that. I don't get it. There are a lot of people. Let me back up. Let me slow down a little. I'm getting it. Can you tell I love Cuphead? Can you tell I love the game? But there are a lot of people they're really upset about this game because it's so difficult, and a lot of the reviews have sort of skewed that way. Like, hey, it's great, but it's too difficult. I don't buy into that. I think this is just an old school game. I don't know if it's any more difficult than, say, a Mega Man is. It takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes patience. Patience is the key to Cuphead. But once you beat a boss, once you memorize all of his moves, once you position that boss the way that you want him to be positioned, once you are able to jump through these narrow windows, or time these attacks perfectly, or monitor the 18 things going on the screen at the same time. Once you beat that boss, I don't know if I've experienced a feeling like it in video games. To be totally honest, I don't know if I've experienced a sensation like that. It is this simultaneous relief. It is this unburdening, but it's so rewarding. A few times I just wanted to jump for joy after I beat some of these bosses, because it is this marathon. It's like training for like a 100K or whatever. It's like a triathlon and it's grueling while you're actually in that moment. While you're playing Cuphead, it's very grueling, and even in the moment, I don't know if I was having fun, just simply for the fact that there's so much going on at any given time that it's hard to think anything other than, okay, jump, dodge, go here, jump. You can't really think that I'm having fun with this. It's not a conscious thing. So I don't know if you're having fun during it, but after, that sense of relief that washes over you is amazing. It is amazing. And that is why I love Cuphead. It's not a perfect game. Don't get me wrong. It's not a perfect game. They did throw in these platforming sections, which are incredibly average. They're just incredibly average. Thankfully, there's only 1 or 2 of them per world, so you're not going to have to deal with them that much. The bosses outnumber those things. Probably 75% of the game is the bosses, if that's not too conservative. So the bosses, they're the best. Platforming stages, they're okay. I guess they break up the action a little bit. But for the most part, the platforming stages are forgettable, which is a shame. And if we get a Cuphead 2, and I'm sure we will, because the game has just surpassed 1 million units sold. Although, with Cuphead, the game has been in development for 7 years. It's all hand-drawn animation, the whole deal. So I don't know if after 1 million units, they're actually recouping the cost of the game development, but that's a very successful launch for an indie game that not too many people knew about. So very good on them. And it's really good. It's really, really good. In Cuphead 2, I want to see them remove some of the platforming levels. but it is so cohesive. There is not one pixel that is out of place. There's not one enemy in that game that looks like it wouldn't completely fit in the 1930s. It has that aesthetic, with the rounded edges, the exaggerated body parts. It's so good. It is so good. Every part of that game is incredibly imaginative, even down to the simplest little enemy in the platforming levels. That's all brilliant, and you can see how much care went into each one of these little things. The most forgettable enemy in the game has this incredible animation, so it'll blink and it'll look and it'll smile, and it's very rare that you get the opportunity to slow down in this game to actually appreciate all of that. But once you do, boy, oh boy, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I'm going to give the game a 9.5 out of 10. That is how much I liked it. I wish that it was a little bit longer. I got through it I probably died 200 times in this game, but after everything, it did take me about 10 to 15 hours to get through. I did go back and I did try to get better scores on these levels and things like that. But it $20, go out and buy it if you want a challenge. It's definitely not a game for everyone. It is absolutely not a game for everyone. If you get frustrated easily, if you never played some of the old NES classic games like Mega Man, like Contra, you're going to be in for a shock. But stick with it, enjoy it, and it'll treat you well. The other game that I've been playing, I can't talk a lot about this simply because I'm not ultra far in it. And that's for a particular reason. But that game is Middle-earth: Shadow of War. This is the follow-up to Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, which came out a number of years ago. And it was phenomenal. It was a really, really, really good game. And frankly, Shadow of War is sort of more of the same. And if you liked Shadow of Mordor, well, chances are you'll like Shadow of War. The general idea behind Shadow of War is it's got this open world sort of vibe to it. It almost feels like an Assassin's Creed where you can climb vertically very, very quickly. So you can run up to a building, jump up it, run up it. You can actually like jump it a few stories at a time after you unlock a certain power. And it's a lot of vertical traversal. You can like walk on these little ropes that are going between areas, and it's very easy to traverse. And it is a Batman Arkham Asylum, Arkham City style combat system. So it's a lot of XXXXXXX, and then hit Y or triangle or whatever it is to dodge an attack. That it's a lot of that. So the combat is not incredibly deep. As long as you have decent timing, you'll be good with that. But the real star of the show here, and this was the case with the original as well, but the Nemesis system. And it's been so long since I played Shadow of Mordor that I forgot how cool the Nemesis system is. And it was something that I was very, very happy to return to in Shadow of War. Now, the reason that I haven't played a whole ton of this game, and the reason that I haven't progressed in the story, in the missions, is because I have done nothing but the Nemesis system. I got to the first main area of the game. It's this big wide open city that's under siege. And all I've been doing is going from Nemesis to Nemesis to Nemesis to Nemesis, taking them out, getting the experience, unlocking different abilities, different you can like call these like warg things in. I forget what they're called, but they're like these cats that you can ride, and then you can unlock this ability to do this move, and you can unlock this ability to jump up a building. I'm just having fun screwing around in this game. And for me, I even though I appreciate Lord of the Rings, I've read the books, I've seen the movies. It's not a series. It's not a world that really speaks to me. I'm not into the whole fantasy thing. It's just not my scene. I appreciate them, and I know enough to be dangerous, but it's just I'd prefer something else. And with Shadow of War, the nice thing is you don't really have to know a lot about the story because the gameplay is so engaging and it's so multi-layered, and it's just a big open sandbox that has these really, really cool systems in it. So if you like Shadow of Mordor, guess what? I would recommend Shadow of War. The game is available on the PC. It's available on the Xbox One, and it's available on the PS4. I I can't rate it yet, but I would give it my recommendation. If you like the first, you'll like this. Otherwise, I've been playing some more Destiny 2, and we're going to have a special episode of Loading Complete Special Edition, where just like last time, we're going to talk Destiny again. I want to revisit this because my opinion of Destiny 2 has changed radically in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And it's changed for the worse. I was not a big fan of the original Destiny. I didn't play a lot of the original Destiny. I couldn't stand it, honestly. Couldn't stand it. I had a few good things going for it, but for the most part, just it was not my thing at all. And so with Destiny 2, I was amazed at how quickly the game hooked me. And it drew me in to this world that I knew nothing about. And the reason that it did that was because it was constantly rewarding me for going through the game. So as I progressed through the story, I got, from level 1 to level 20, which is maximum level. And not only that, but I was finding all these weapons along the way. So it got to the point where, just playing the story mission or just doing this strike or just doing this public event, you would get weapons that were really, really, really good. And they were an improvement over the weapons that you had, sometimes by a very significant margin. And all of those improved weapons were actually going towards your light level, which is what you need a high light level, like 275, 280 at least for the end game, which is the raid. And it's some of the Iron Banner stuff, even though it doesn't really take into account light. But that's what you needed for the end game. And seeing that number tick up and tick up and tick up, even though it was gradually, it felt like it was rewarding my play. Now I've reached almost maximum light level. I have a good chunk of the items in the game, and there's not really much to do anymore. And I'm not one of those people that is going to play a lot of these. I don't think the multiplayer is anything to write home about. The competitive gaming, or the competitive mode Crucible. It's nothing special for me. I think it lacks a lot of that typical Bungie magic. Sure, it feels okay, but nothing there draws me in at all. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that. And otherwise, the rewards have really just stopped. They've just stopped. And at least in the first Destiny, you could go and you could roll for new weapons. So if you wanted a Gallowhorn and you had a Gallowhorn that was sort of crappy in terms of its stats, you could play and grind and hope to get a better rocket launcher than what you have. With this, everything is the same stat. So they'll have different power levels that you can then you can use other items to infuse into those. But for the most part, everything is pretty much static. So you hit this point where there's not much else to do in the game. The weapons that you have are the weapons that you have. They're not going to get any better the more you play. Your light level is not going to increase much more. Your hard cap level is not going to increase much more. And I'm bored. I'm bored with it. That is not to say that I dislike the game. I think for $60, you get a hell of a value on there. I have spent probably pretty close to 100 or more hours in Destiny 2. It just doesn't have what it takes to keep me interested from now until whenever the next, the first DLC comes out. It just doesn't have the content there that I need for that. We're going to get in depth into this topic a little bit later on in the week. The podcast should be up by Friday, so definitely check that out if you want to hear my thoughts. We're going to have John Guida back, our resident Destiny expert, who is going to join me for the conversation, and we're going to see just what kind of conclusion we come to now, a number of weeks removed from the launch of Destiny 2. I want to start the next segment by telling a story. You'll understand where the story is going at the end of it. When I was in high school, I got a job at Miller Park. I was actually a freshman in high school. I think I was 14 at the time. I got a job at Miller Park, and it was the first year that Miller Park was open. So they were staffing up, they were hiring like crazy, and they were hiring 14-year-olds. So I went with my friend and we applied, and we both got the job, which is really cool. I worked in an area called the Big League Blast. I don't think it's there anymore, but it was on the Loge level. I think like between home plate and third base, probably. And I worked there for a number of years. And when I turned 15 and a half, I had saved up $3,000 to buy my grandmother's car. It was a nice little Toyota Corolla. Nothing special, cloth seats, no power windows or anything like that, but she took immaculate care of it. And I thought, well, I need a car, and $3,000, she's selling it to me below Blue Book. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So I bought the car. It served me really, really well for a number of years. But as I grew older, as I accrued a little bit more money and I started getting raises both at Miller Park and at other companies, as I went into the beginning of college, and this was probably like 2004-ish, I thought, okay, time to ditch my grandma's Corolla. And so I went to a Ford dealership, a local Ford dealership, and I fell in love with a deep blue Mustang. It was a convertible. I love having all the windows of my car rolled down. I'm not a big fan of air conditioning during the summer. I prefer to roll down the windows. I thought convertible, perfect. The car was gorgeous. It only had like 20,000 miles on it, and they weren't asking a whole heck of a lot. And I thought, you know what, this is going to be a really great car to buy. So I started the process. I took it for a test drive. I really liked how the car felt. I like the power of this car. And in talking with the salesperson after the test drive, I sort of gave him an overview of my financial environment, my financial standing, and he went in and talked with one of their financial guys, and they came out and they said, well, yeah, we think we could put you in this car for about like $350 a month. And I thought, okay, perfect. So the plan was to come back the next day. I was going to simply fill out all the paperwork and leave in my brand new Mustang. And because this was the first car I ever purchased from a dealership, I asked my dad to go along with me. And he said, well, be careful, be careful, be careful. So I went in and I'm starting to sign the papers, and I look, and not only did the monthly cost of that car jump from like $350 to like $550, there were a lot of other things in the paperwork that we hadn't agreed to. And what I came to realize was, okay, this dealership is trying to pull a fast one on me. And I still believe that to this day. In light of that, I had to come to the conclusion, and I did this on my own, that, you know what, I could afford this car, probably, but that is stretching myself way too thin. So the purpose of the story is to illustrate that even though you have the desire, you want something, sometimes reason and feasibility clashes with that. Same thing if you want to go out and buy a Lamborghini. Well, you know what? You want to, but that doesn't mean you actually can. And so there's a difference between what we want and what we can do. And I was reminded of that story when this entire ruckus about loot crates came into focus over the last few weeks. Now, in case you don't know, a loot crate is this pseudo gambling hook that a lot of games are throwing in right now. So the idea of a loot crate traditionally, and there are loot crates that differ from this, so this is not the only circumstance of these loot crates, but you typically pay real world money on top of what you've paid for the game to unlock these crates, which contain any number of randomized items. So Rocket League, I'll use that as an example. With Rocket League, you can buy keys to unlock these loot crates that you earn in game. In those loot crates are like one of, 12 or 16 different items. And you can spend a key, which you pay for, and unlock that crate. And hopefully you get the item that you want. Typically you don't, because you get 1 out of 16 and there are different rarity classes within that loot crate. So it is almost this gambling mechanism where you pay real world money for the chance to get something that you want. That's all well and good, right? Whatever. However, lately it seems loot crates have just exploded in popularity. And I think Overwatch was actually one of the first games to popularize this idea. So, just taking a look at recent games, we have games like Lawbreakers, Injustice 2, Forza Motorsport 7, For Honor, Star Wars Battlefront 2, the beta, okay, even the beta. You have Mass Effect Andromeda, you have Middle-earth Shadow of War, you have a number of different games, even like Call of Duty World War II, that is going to have these loot crates, loot boxes. That's a lot. That is a lot of AAA games that are going in this direction. I have heard a lot of complaining about this. Why should we have to pay for loot crates when we already paid $60 for the game? And I completely understand that. Absolutely. I hate loot crates. The only loot crates I don't mind are in Rocket League because you don't need them. They're a bonus. You can spend $10 and hope you get something, but you know what? It's all aesthetic. It's all just for looks. It doesn't impact how your card drives. It doesn't impact anything else. So a lot of people are really upset about this. And this is not something that's new. For a very, very long time, game publishers have been trying to figure out a way to charge more money for a game. And why is this? Well, over the years, as technology progresses, games get more and more expensive to make. If you remember back in the GameCube, Xbox, PS2 era, games were still about $50, and they had been $50 for a very, very long period of time. And back then, publishers were testing the waters a little bit. So that was around the time that you started seeing some of these, quote, collector's editions, special editions of these games, which would package, a $20, $30, $40 piece of plastic for $150 plus the game. And, these were very limited, so you had to run out and you had to get them. And back then, you know what? A lot of them actually were legitimately limited. BioShock on the Xbox 360, that is one of the first that I realized, holy crap, there's actually a huge demand for these things. So it's a way to increase profit margins on games as they become more and more expensive. Well, back during that era, when games were still $50, publishers were starting to experiment. And the experiment was, are people willing to spend more money for these games? And you know what? With all of those collector's editions, with all those special editions at the time, they sold so well, they decided, yeah, they are willing to spend a little bit more money. As a matter of fact, we think that not only will people buy all these special editions and all these collector's editions, we think that people will spend $60 for a base game. We're talking 10 years ago, almost a decade ago at this point. Almost 2 decades ago. Especially if you go back to like 2001-ish. And since then, the games have stayed relatively the same, $60. And the problem with that is the price of the games have stayed the same, but the development costs have risen like crazy. So what is any publisher going to do? They're going to try to find ways to increase their profit margins for the game. We've seen developers be very, very disappointed in the past with the sales of games. And everybody points to this, I'm going to point to it. In 2013, Square Enix came out and they said, the sales of Tomb Raider, the 2013 reboot, were disappointing. They called it a disappointment. Their exact words, disappointment. That game sold 3.4 million units. 3.4 million units for a Tomb Raider reboot that nobody thought was going to be any good. Okay? So you can see that a game not only has to sell 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million units to make up its development cost. They have to sell more than that, especially if it's a AAA game. Game development budgets are almost, for a AAA game, they're almost always at least $100 million. And you see games that have crossed the $250 million threshold. We're talking AAA blockbuster movies, summer blockbuster movies. That's how much these games are costing. And obviously it has a much more limited audience then does a movie, because a movie is not really limited by demographic. Demographic might shift from movie to movie, but the overall demographic for movies is probably a little bit more broad than gamers right now. That is not to say that the gaming demographic is small, because it's not. But game developers, obviously, they're charging $60 for a game instead of a $10 movie ticket. So, what is a publisher to do? Well, there are a few things that they can try to do. There are a few models that have really come out and arisen in this mobile app store marketplace, smartphone marketplace. And you have things like pay to play. So you just go out and you buy a $60 game, and that's it. There's nothing else. You have things like pay to win, where you can buy in-game items with actual currency. The game might be free, the game might not be free, but you can impact how you play the game. A popular one right now is the ability to simply speed up a game. There's a game that I play called Dungeon Inc. I don't play it. It's more of an idle game, and you simply the numbers go up. It's so stupid. It's incredibly stupid, but you can unlock these rooms. The rooms generate revenue. The revenue goes up. You can use that revenue to unlock another room, so forth and so on. And what you can do is you can pay money to speed up that process. So if you don't want to wait, the 15 minutes or the 2 hours or the 3 days or whatever it is, you can pay $15, $10, $5, $100, whatever you want, and speed that process along. There have been other attempts to monetize these games apart from their $60 price tags. And a really popular one, and it's terrible. It's terrible. I hate them. Season passes. Hey, okay, let me put this into perspective for you with the season passes. Imagine a guy came up to you on the street, and that guy had a box, a black box. Couldn't see what was in it. It was just a black box. And the box had a label on it, and it said Assassin's Creed Origins. And he goes, hey, $40, and I'll sell you whatever is in this box. Well, you ask him, well, what's in the box? I can't tell you what's in the box, but I can tell you there are 3 things in the box, and they're all related to Assassin's Creed Origins. Would you give him that $40, that $50, that $30? No, nobody would. But you know what? That's what game companies are expecting. That's what publishers are expecting. You don't know what's in that season pass, but guess what? Because you like Assassin's Creed, you're just going to go out and buy it anyway. So I think that's a process that's really, really shady. Same thing with DLC. Sometimes, a lot of this DLC, you can buy it piecemeal, you can buy the season pass, but those are all attempts to increase the price of these games and the profit of these games. Well, unfortunately, that's not enough. It's not, especially when you have these inflating budgets. Now that technology is progressing, you have things like VR, and everybody expects VR functionality. And then you have these PC games coming out, and so all the games have to be mastered. They have to be 4K assets. It has to be able to run in 4K. It needs to be optimized. The whole deal. You're pushing 4 times as many pixels as you were, 10 years ago, when everybody was playing in 1080p or lower in the case of the Nintendo Wii, and game development costs have skyrocketed. And there are only 2 options. The first option would be to raise the price of a game so that you're probably pushing $100, $80, somewhere in that range, or keep selling the loot boxes and keep selling the season passes. Unfortunately, there's no real easy answer, and I think everybody's opinion on that is going to depend on whether or not they'd like to pony up front for $20 extra, $30 extra for that AAA blockbuster game. The current implementation of a lot of these season passes, of this DLC, of these loot boxes, loot crates, the issue with them is that people feel nickel and dimed, and I can't say that I blame people for that. I feel nickel and dime too, especially after I plop down 60 hard-earned dollars for a lot of these things. Now, you take that in conjunction with a number of other seedy practices that have seemed to be going on with publishers. One of those seedy practices is the lack of review copies. So not only are they asking you to blindly spend $60, they are also asking you to blindly buy season passes. They are asking you to blindly trust that The loot boxes in their games will not be egregious, will not be pay to win. And they're expecting a lot of the customer. And I can absolutely see where that frustration comes in. I have that frustration. Frankly, like it really is disconcerting when you go into a GameStop or you go into a Best Buy and these people are pushing these season passes on you before the season pass has even been announced. You don't even know what's in it, and they're asking for you to pony up that $40. And so there's a lot of trust expected on the part of the customer by these publishers. And a lot of the time that feels bad. It feels wrong. And that's how I have felt recently. However, this is where my opinion probably differs from the vast majority of the people out there. I'm okay with it. I'm not okay with reviewers not getting review copies for games. I can't tell you how many publishers have said, no, sorry, we're not sending this out for review. I get that all the time. I get that from Bethesda still, after they decided to not ship out early copies of games. Take Fallout 4. I'm getting on a tangent. When I get worked up, I get on a tangent. But take Fallout 4. I got Fallout 4 almost a month early. A month before it hit shelves. I was able to sit down and I was able to play Fallout 4 and give a very, in my opinion, solid review, an unbiased review of the game's strengths and the game's weaknesses. The game was full of bugs at the time. It really was. And even though it was a phenomenal game that I still love to this day, it was full of bugs. It was full of glitches. And so just it's so much to expect on the part of the consumer to buy a game sight unseen, to buy a game without reading a review, to then buy a season pass without even knowing if the original game, the $60 standalone game, is going to be any good, or if it's going to be supported from for the next 2 years. You see these games coming out that are supported for 9 months, and then all of a sudden the online service is shut down. So it's a lot to ask on the part of the consumer, and I'm not okay with that. Just to make that clear, I am not okay with publishers and game developers asking that much of their audience. There needs to be some give and take. However, specifically in regards to the loot boxes, I would take loot boxes over these shady season passes. We've seen games come out where they sell you these season passes and there's nothing to them. The first episode of DLC will be terrible. The second episode will be terrible. And the third might be much more significant. But if given the option, and this is the lesser of two evils, and I hate that we're in this position, but we are in this position. The lesser of two evils, for me at least, is the loot crate. With the loot crate, if it's not pay to win, at least I have the option of doing it. Now, Middle-earth Shadow of War, they do have that loot box. You can buy orcs for real world money. You can send those orcs out on missions to get, more in-game resources, things like that. But I never really felt compelled to go out and pay $20 or $99 in the case of some of these games to get that. So if a game comes out for $60 and there are loot boxes that give you aesthetics that don't impact the core game, or if what they give you impacts the game in a lesser fashion, I'm okay with that. I'd rather take that over the shady season passes, over the shady DLC, and all of that, everything that comes along with that. So I'm really torn, and it's one of those cases where what you want is not realistic. The developers need to make the cost, the rapidly increasing cost of this game development up somewhere. And right now we're seeing these publishers, these developers throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And loot crates are just the next example of that. And you know what? There's going to be something else 6 months from now, and there's going to be something else 6 months from then, because there needs to be a more sustainable model here. And loot crates, maybe that's the solution. I don't know. I think a better overall solution would be to simply increase the price of a game and increase it to what you need it to be, and don't nickel and dime people after the fact. But again, I think loot boxes that only give you aesthetic items like Rocket League that don't interfere with the second-to-second gameplay of a game, I think those are okay. Crappy still, but okay. I'll have that over a base increase or anything else. So that's my rant. I know This is one of those logic versus emotion things. And logically, I know that loot crates are keeping the base price of games down. I know they are keeping them affordable for the vast majority of people out there, but that doesn't mean I have to like them, and I don't. It's just one of those realities. It's one of those sad, sad realities of the gaming space right now. Next up, I want to talk about something that is further down the pipe. And that is the idea of AR. AR has been in the news a lot recently when Apple unveiled the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 10. Yeah, I think you pronounce it 10, not X, which I will be buying for sure. They talked a lot about AR. And AR, for those of you who don't know, it stands for augmented reality. And this is not virtual reality where you put the screen over your face. The idea of augmented reality is that it overlays information, it overlays graphics on your real world. So I'll give you a few examples of this. For example, you are walking down the street and you see a restaurant. If you're wearing these augmented reality glasses or goggles or whatever they are, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But if you're wearing these glasses, what if in your vision, over the name of that restaurant, you would see your friends who had recently eaten there. You would see photos of their food. You would see what the recommendations were. You would maybe even see a little video. You go into that restaurant, curious to try some food, and you look down at your plate, and there are little arrows going to each separate piece of your meal. So there's an arrow pointing to the corn, and it shows then where the corn was grown, who grew it, what the farmer's name is. You leave and you want to see a movie, so you simply look at the movie marquee, and up pops all this movie information. And you have the idea of AR is that you have all this information at your fingertips. I'll give you another example. You're trying to fix a washing machine. Don't ever try to fix a washing machine. It is a nightmare. I've tried it. I have failed many, many times. It is an absolute nightmare. Don't try to do it. But if your washing machine went and you have to try to fix it yourself, you take off the back panel and you just see this mess of wires, right? And age has decimated these wires. There's nothing left to them. They're all scattered all over the place. It looks like this wire is detached from this wire. You just don't know what the heck you're doing. Well, you would put on these glasses or these goggles, whatever it is, and you would see the back of your washing machine come to life. And it would give you this overlay over your existing wires of where everything else should go. And it would tell you, take this wire, put this wire here, take this wire, put this wire here. Oh, we think this is what the issue is. And it's this back and forth communication. So the camera on the front is taking in what you're seeing. It's probably pinging the cloud somewhere, some server, and it's overlaying that vital information in front of your eyes. Now, the idea of eSports and AR is a very intriguing one. And just to be clear, this information it's far down the line. Okay, this discussion is far down the line. I do have a source within a large technology company, a very large technology company, who is privy to some inside information. And this individual actually got to test some AR glasses from one of these big tech companies. And these are very, very experimental. They are not coming out for at least 3 to 5 years. The technology is simply not there. But they were telling me how incredible it actually was and how this is going to revolutionize how we view the world. And it's not that far away. Tim Cook from Apple has actually come out recently and said, look, the technology just isn't there yet. And he's not wrong. It's not there. But there are companies that are on the bleeding edge of AR. And those companies like Microsoft already have products out in the wild. HoloLens from Microsoft is a giant, chunky, bulky headset that you put onto your head, and there's a very tiny little screen with a very narrow field of view that can overlay this really compelling content onto a blank table or onto a blank wall or interacting with a motorcycle that you're designing, whatever the case is. That's just not there. The price, it's cost prohibitive. The screens, the field of view on the screens is very lacking. Typically, you need some major processing to throw this image on these crystal lenses, on these transparent screens, and it's just too much right now. But the leading theory is 5 to 10 years down the line, AR is going to be the thing. Now, I went all in on VR, and in hindsight, that was a mistake. VR is a technology that it's not ready yet. It's not where it needs to be yet. And we're seeing that with the languishing PSVR. We're seeing that with the languishing HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift, which just saw another permanent price drop down to $399. It's just not doing well, regardless of what the marketing spins will want you to believe. So VR is sort of on the way out. It came in, it made a little bit of a whimper. People were intrigued. There was a lot of hype, but you know what? It's sort of dying on the vine. And it's going to die on the vine until, the technology improves and improves and improves and improves. AR is something that is a little bit, not a little bit, has a lot wider of a use case. So it's not just for gaming. It's going to be used for just everyday life. At some point, it's probably going to interact with your phone. Everybody has a phone. Everybody's going to want to wear these glasses, or who knows, these contact lenses, whatever it is, further down the line. And my source within this company was talking about some of these use cases. And they said, look, it's going to radically change gaming. And I said, well, how so? And the source was telling me about some potential gaming applications, and that got me thinking. That got me really, really thinking about how augmented reality is going to impact eSports. Now, eSports right now, even though the popularity is exploding, even though places like the Luxor in Las Vegas are turning nightclubs into eSports arenas, that's all well and good. But what we have to realize is that esports is still very nascent. It's very small. It's very nichey. And that's not a criticism of esports. It is in its infancy right now, and nobody really knows how to handle it. Now, you compare that with something like the NFL. I'm going to use the NFL as an example here. The NFL is huge. It has so many different viewers. And the interesting thing about the NFL is that there are many, many, many sources of revenue for the NFL. For example, to broadcast a game, you have to pay the NFL. To buy a jersey, well, guess what? You're probably paying for the licensing on that jersey. You're paying for the actual jersey itself. There are all these advertising deals. Have you ever gone to Lambeau Field and it says, official hot dog of Lambeau Field, the official snowblower of Lambeau Field? And there are all of these sponsorship deals. There's advertising. Hey, you want to advertise during the Super Bowl? Well, that 30-second spot is going to be $2 million. They have all these very diverse sources of revenue coming in. With esports right now, that doesn't happen. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers to esports right now. It's basically just sponsorship deals for the esports players. It's some buy-ins we're seeing with the Overwatch League, for example. The buy-in is pretty hefty. I believe it's $1 million. So you're seeing revenue that way, and you're seeing a little bit of ad revenue. And so you only have 3 areas of revenue for esports, whereas you have unlimited sources of revenue for something like the NFL or the NBA. Part of that is because of demographic. Esports typically tend to skew younger. We're talking under 35, while sports typically tend to skew higher in age, 55 years of age and older. Some sports, like golf, are way above that. Way above that. And right now, there's not really anything bridging the gap. So there is probably a crossover. If you think about a Venn diagram, there's going to be parts of that circle, those two circles that do overlap. Don't get me wrong. A lot of NFL fans are probably esports fans as well, but there needs to be a convergence of those two demographics for esports to really, really take off. And even if you look at it from the sports perspective, the traditional sports perspective, to gain a new audience. Well, I think that's where AR comes in. Now follow me here. Imagine this. You're in an arena and the lights dim and everybody is watching this. Okay. In the center of the arena, a team walks in one side, a team walks in the other. They all have these AR glasses on. And they look like normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill glasses. However, those are AR glasses, and it can overlay information in the real world. So in between these two teams are all these barriers, like what you would see at a paintball field. You have all these geometric shapes, you have these circles, you have other objects, maybe like cars, whatever it is. And these players then don these glasses. They actually have like physical weapons. They have pulse rifles or assault rifles or whatever it is. Obviously, they don't shoot live ammo or anything, but they are used in this AR game. And then the AR glasses that they have on basically pit these two teams against each other. So, or even against a common enemy. Who knows? Maybe there's only one team, and the AR glasses simply overlay a mutant onto one wall, breaking out of one wall, and then it overlays the car with these flames, so it looks like there's a flaming car, and these players have to work together to battle this alien invasion that is literally coming out of the walls. That really combines physicality, the physicality of traditional sports, of sports like the NFL, like the NBA, like the NHL, whatever it is, with the electronic aspect, the virtual aspect, the fantastical aspect of video games. And when you have that crossover, and again, I don't know if this is going to happen. I'm just putting on my future specs right now, and I'm trying to look 10 years, 15 years down the road and try to figure out what the heck esports is going to be. Because frankly, nobody knows what esports is going to be in 2 years. Nobody knows what esports is going to be in 3, 4, 5 years from now. It's a wide open field. The games that are being played right now, Dota 2, Overwatch, Call of Duty, those games might not exist in 10 years. It's going to be something else. It might be the battle royale genre with games like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds or Fortnite or whatever it is. So nobody knows. It's wide open. And it gets increasingly vague as you go from year to year to year to year to year. Heck, who even knows what an esport is anymore? The line is blurring. And I think AR has the opportunity. It has it has the chance to bring some of that physicality into esports. And I'm not saying that esports players right now lack that physicality. I think it is insane how some of these players, their reaction times, how quickly they can navigate a keyboard. We're talking reaction times that are they're almost inhuman, truly inhuman. And this is physical stuff that takes a very, very, very long time to perfect. But unfortunately, that is not super accessible to the average guy out there who's watching the NFL. The NFL watcher or the NBA watcher or just that average guy, 55 years of age or older, 45 years of age or older, they're going to look at that and they're not going to see that. That's another problem that the esports has right now, and that is accessibility. A lot of these games are like Dota 2, for example. It's very difficult to jump into the middle of a Dota 2 match and know what's going on. But if you have that physicality brought to you by augmented reality, I think you're cooking with gas right now. I think you're moving in a direction that has a lot more mainstream appeal than people sitting at keyboards. So the future of esports, nobody knows what it's going to be. But I sort of have a feeling that it's going to be augmented reality. And I think we're going to see a blending of traditional sports physicality with the electronic landscape of video games. And you know what? I would be totally okay with that. I would actually be okay with that. So esports, it's going to change. It is changing. New things are coming out every single day. Who thought that PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds might possibly be an esport later down? Nobody even saw that game coming. So it's a wide open field, but from my source, there are some very, very, very exciting things happening over the next 5 to 10 years. So we're just going to have to wait and see. That is going to about do it for today's show. We are going to have a very special edition of Loading Complete. I think we're calling these just Loading Complete Special Edition. We're going to be having another episode of discussing Destiny 2. You can hear all of my grievances, my newfound grievances with the game. That will be up on Friday. We're going to have John Guida back, our Destiny expert. We're going to have a lively conversation, I expect. So don't miss that. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you want to write in about something that I said, maybe your future esports predictions, that would be pretty cool. You can always email me loadingcompleteshow@gmail.com. That's loadingcompleteshow@gmail.com. I will try to read all submissions on the air. We do have a number of emails that I have not yet gotten to, but we will. We'll talk about it. We'll have an expanded mailbag segment. I typically try to come up with topics that at least relate to some of the emails, and none of the emails have really related as of yet. So we'll get to those in the future. We might just have a larger mailbag segment that where we can run through all of those, but definitely write in. I want to hear what you guys think. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.